Hello everyone, welcome to My Fluency Journey, and today we are starting again this live book reading session and learn some new vocabularies. So yeah, let's start. And this is Sapiens, and we are currently reading chapter 15, part Empty Maps. So yeah, so the modern explorer and conqueror. Modern explorer and conqueror mentality is nicely illustrated by the development of modern world maps. Many cultures drew world map long before the modern age. Obviously, none of them really knew the whole of the world. No Afro-Asian culture knew about America, and no American culture knew about Afro-Asia. But unfamiliar areas were simply left out or filled with imaginary monsters and wonders. These maps had no empty spaces. They gave the impression of a familiarity with the entire world. During the 15th and 16th century, Europeans began to draw world map with lots of empty spaces. One indication of the development of the scientific mindset as well as of the European imperial drive. The empty maps were a psychological and ideological breakthrough, a clear admission that Europeans were ignorant of large part of the world. The crucial turning point came in 1492 when Christopher Columbus sailed westward from Spain seeking a new route to East Asia. Columbus still believed in all complete world maps. Using them, he calculated that Japan should have been located about 7,000 kilometers west of Spain. In fact, more than 20,000 kilometers and an entire unknown continent separate East Asia from Spain. On 12 October 1492, at about 2 am, Columbus' expedition collided with unknown continent. Juan Rodriguez Bermejo, on watching from the mast of the ship Pinta, spotted an island in what we know called Bahamas and shouted, "Land, land!" So Columbus believed that he had reached a small island of the East Asian coast. He called the people he found there Indians because he thought he had landed in the Indies, what we now call the East Indies or Indonesian archipelago. Columbus stuck to this error of the rest of his life. The idea that he had discovered a completely unknown continent was inconceivable for him and for many of his generations. For many of his generations, right? For thousands of years, not only the greatest thinkers and scholars but also the infallible scriptures had known only Europe, Africa, and Asia. Could they all have been wrong? Could the Bible have missed half the world? It would be as if in 1969, on its way to the moon, Apollo 11 had crashed into a hitherto unknown moon circling the Earth, which all previous observation had somehow failed to spot. In his refusal to in his refusal to admit ignorance, Columbus was still a medieval man. He was convinced he knew the whole world, and even his momentous discovery failed to convince him otherwise. Okay, the European world map from 1459. The map is filled with details even when depicting areas that were completely unfamiliar with Europe, such as Southern Africa. Okay. The first modern man was Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian sailor who took part in several expeditions to America in years 1499 to 504. 1504. Between 1502 and 1504, two texts describing these expeditions were published in Europe. They were attributed to Vespucci. These texts argued that new land between by Columbus were not islands of East Asian coast but rather than an entire continent unknown to scriptures, like classical geographers and contemporary Europeans. In 1507, convinced by these arguments, a respected map maker named Martin Waldseemüller published an updated world map, the first to show the place where Europe's westward sailing fleets had landed as a separate continent. Having drawn it, Waldseemüller had to give it a name. Erroneously believing that Amerigo Vespucci had been the person who discovered it, Waldseemüller named the continent in America. The Waldseemüller map became very popular and was copied by many other cartographers, spreading the name he had given the new land. And there is poetic justice in the fact that a quarter of the world and two of its 7 continents are named after a little known Italian whose sole claim to fame is that he had the courage to say we don't know. Okay. The discovery of America was foundational event of the scientific revolution. It not only taught Europeans to favor present observation over past traditions, but the desire to conquer America also obliged. Okay, let's start. Duty. Europeans to search for new knowledge and breakneck speed. If they really wanted to control the vast new territories, they had to gather enormous amount of new data about geography, climate, flora, fauna, languages, cultures, and history of the new continent. Christian scriptures, or geography books, and ancient oral traditions were of little help. Henceforth, not only European geographers, European geographers, but European scholars in almost all fields of knowledge began to draw maps with spaces are left to fill in. They began to admit that their theories were not perfect and that there were important things that did not know. The Europeans were drawn to black spots on the map if they were magnets and promptly starting filling them in. During the 15th and 16th century, European expeditions circumnavigated Africa, explored America, crossed the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and created a network of bases and colonies all over the world. They established the first truly global empire and knitted together the first global trade network. The European imperial expedition transformed the history of the world from being a series of histories of isolated people and cultures. It became the history of a single integrated human society. These Europeans, these Europeans explore and conquer expeditions are so familiar to us that we tend to overlook just how extraordinary they were. Nothing like them and had never happened before. Long distance campaigns of conquest are not a natural undertaking. Throughout history, most human society was so busy with local conflicts and neighborhood quarrels that they never considered exploring and conquering distant lands. Most great empires extended their control only over their immediate neighbors. They reached far-flung lands simply because their neighborhood kept expanding. Thus, the Roman conquered Etruria in order to defend Rome. Then conquered the Po Valley in order to defend Etruria. They subsequently conquered Provence to defend the Po Valley, Gaul to defend Provence, and Britain in order to defend Gaul. It took them 400 years to get from Rome to London. क्या हुआ? अरे लगा दे गेट. अरे बाहर से लगा दो. It took them 400 years to get from Rome to London. In 350 BC, no Roman would have conceived of sailing directly to Britain and conquering it. Occasionally, an ambitious. Okay, so ambitious is highly motivated. Ambitious learner, right? So, ambitious ruler or adventurer could embark on a long-range campaign of conquest, but such campaigns usually followed well-beaten imperial and commercial paths. The campaigns of Alexander the Great, for example, didn't result in the establishment of a new empire, but rather in the usurpation, usurpation. What's this? USR, UR. Usurpation. Taking something, especially power position, by force. Act of taking by force without legal rights of an existing empire, that of Persians. The closest precedents of to the modern European empire were the ancient naval empires of Athens and Carthage and the medieval naval empire of Mazapahit, which held sway over much of Indonesia in the 14th century. Yet, even these empires rarely ventured into unknown seas. Their naval exploits were local undertakings when compared to the global ventures of the modern Europeans. Many scholars argue that voyages of Admiral Zhang He of the Chinese Ming Dynasty heralded and eclipsed the European voyages of discovery. Between 1405 and 1433, Zhang had led 7 huge armadas from China to the far reach of the Indian Oceans. The largest of these comprised almost 300 ships and carried close to 30,000 people. They visited Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, Persia, Gulf, Red Sea, and East Asia, East Africa. Chinese ships anchored in Zeda, at the main harbor of the Hejaz, and in Malindi or Kenyan coast. Columbus' fleets of 1492, which consisted of 3 small ships, went by 220 sailors, was like a trio of mosquitoes compared to Zheng He's drove of dragons. Yet there was a crucial difference. Zheng He explored the oceans and assisted pro-Chinese rulers, but he did not try to conquer or colonize the countries he visited. Moreover, the expedition of Zheng He were not deeply rooted in Chinese politics and cultures. When the ruling faction in Beijing changed during the 1430s, the new warlords abruptly terminated the operation. The Great Fleet was dismantled, crucial technical and geographical knowledge was lost, and no explorer of such stature and means ever set out again from a Chinese port. Chinese rulers in the coming centuries, like most Chinese rulers in previous centuries, restricted their interests and ambitions to the Middle Kingdoms and immediate environments. Immediate environments. Environs. Okay. Okay, let's see what the environment means. Surrounding area, right? Surrounding area, okay. The Zheng He expeditions proved that uh, Europe did not enjoy an outstanding technological edge. What made European exceptional was their unparalleled and insatiable ambition. Insatiable means desire on that cannot be satisfied. Emotional and intellectual hunger. Satisfied. Desire that can't be satisfied is insatiable. Ambition to explore and conquer. Although they might have had the ability, the Romans never attempted to conquer India or Scandinavia. No. Scandinavia. The Persians never attempted to conquer Madagascar or Spain. The Chinese never attempted to conquer Indonesia or Africa. Most Chinese rulers left nearby Japan to its own devices. There was nothing peculiar about that. Not necessarily peculiar. There is nothing peculiar about that. It's a common word, right? Unusual, strange. The oddity is that early modern Europeans caught a fever that drove them to sail to distant and completely unknown lands full of alien cultures. Take one step onto the beaches and immediately declare, I claim all the territory for my king. Okay. I claim all the territory for my king. So Chengiz flagship next to that of Columbus. Oh, right. Invasion from outer space. Around 1517, Spanish colonists in Caribbean islands hear began to hear vague rumors about a powerful empire somewhere in the center of the Mexican mainland. A mere 4 years later, the Aztec capital was a smoldering ruin. A smoldering ruin, burning in smoke. Smoldering means burning in smoke, right? Burning in smoke, right? Okay, the Aztec Empire was a thing of the past, and the Hernian Cortes lorded over a vast new Spanish empire in Mexico. The Spaniards didn't stop to congratulate themselves or even to catch their breath. They immediately commenced explore and conquer operations in all directions. The previous ruler of Central America, the Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Maya, barely knew South America existed and never made any attempt to subjugate it. Subjugate. Never subjugate. It is also a common word in nowadays to bring under control by force, to suppress, never attempt to conquer it. Okay, why they use conquer here? Over the course of 2000 years, yet within little more than 10 years of the Spanish conquest of Mexico, Francisco Pizarro had discovered the Inca Empire in South America, vanquishing it in 1532. Had the Aztecs and Incas shows a bit more interest in the world surrounding them, and they had known what the Spaniards had done to their neighbors, they might have resisted the Spanish conquest more keenly and successfully. In the years separating Columbus' first journey to America from the landing of Cortes in Mexico, the Spaniards conquered most of the Caribbean islands, setting up a chain of new colonies for the subjugated natives. These colonies were hell on earth. They were ruled with the iron fist by greedy and unscrupulous colonists. Unscrupulous. Worked without moral principles. Dishonest. Dishonest. Corrupt. Who enslaved them and set them to work in mines and plantations, killing anyone who offered the slightest resistance. Slightest resistance. Most of the native population soon died either because of the harsh working conditions or the virulence of the diseases that hitchhiked to America on the Conqueror sailing ships. Within 20 years, almost the entire native Caribbean population was wiped out. The Spanish colonists began putting African slaves to fill the vacuum. This genocide took place on every doorstep of the Aztec Empire, yet when Cortes landed on the empire's eastern coast, the Aztecs knew nothing about it. The coming of the Spaniards was the equivalent of an alien invasion from outer space. The Aztecs were convinced that they knew the entire world and they ruled most of it. To them, it was unimaginable that outside their domain could exist anything like these Spaniards. When Cortes and his men landed on the sunny beaches of today's Veracruz, it was first time that Aztec encountered a completely unknown people. The Aztec didn't know how to react. They had trouble deciding what these strangers are. Unlike all humans, the aliens had white skin. They also had a lot of facial hairs, and some had hair the color of the sun. And they stank horribly. Native hygiene was far better than Spanish hygiene. When the Spaniards first arrived in Mexico, natives bearing incense burner was assigned to company wherever they went. The Spaniards thought it was mark of divine honor. We know from native source they found the newcomer smell unbearable. The aliens' material culture was even more bewildering. It's confusing. They came in giant ships, the like of which the Aztec had never imagined, and let alone seen. They rode on the back of huge and terrifying animals. Swift as the wind, they could produce lightning and thunder out of shiny metal sticks. They had flashing long swords and impenetrable armor, against which the native wooden swords and flint spears were useless. Some Aztecs thought these must be gods. Others argued that they were demons, or the ghosts of the dead, or powerful sorcerers. Instead of concentrating all available forces and wiping out the Spaniards, the Aztec deliberated, dawdled, and negotiated. They saw no reason to rush. After all, Cords had no more than 550 Spaniards with him. What could 550 men do to an empire of million? Koch was equally ignorant about the Aztecs, but he and his men held significant advantage over adversaries. While the Aztec had no experience to prepare them for the arrival of these strange-looking and foul-smelling aliens, the Spaniards knew that the earth was full of unknown human beings, and no one had greater expertise in invading alien lands and dealing with situations about which they were utterly ignorant. For the modern European conqueror, like the modern European scientists, plunging into the unknown was exhilarating. It was exciting. Okay, plunging and exhilarating. Plunging. Falling suddenly and rapidly. Exhilarating. Thrilling and exciting, right? Okay, wait for a while. I will have to check something. So I will be back. I will be back in some minute, right? So yeah. Okay. Now I'm back. Exhilarating is exciting, right? So when Gors anchored off that sunny beach in July 1519, he did not hesitate to act. Like a science fiction alien emerging from his spaceship, he declared to the awestruck locals, "We come in peace, take us to your leader." Koch explained that he was peaceful misery from the great king of Spain and asked for a diplomatic interview with the Aztec ruler Montezuma II. This was a shameless lie. Koch led an independent expedition of greedy adventurers. The king of Spain never heard of Koch, none of the Aztecs. Koch were given guides, wood, food, and some military assistance by local of the Aztecs. He then marched toward the Aztec capital, the great metropolis of Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs allowed the aliens to march all the way to the capital, and respectively led the aliens leader to greet Emperors Montezuma. In the middle of interview, Kurtz gave a signal and steel-armed Spanish butcher Montezuma's bodyguards, who were armed only with wooden clubs and stone knives. The ordered guest took his host prisoners. Took his host prisoners. Took his host prisoner. Kurtz was now in a very delicate situation. He had captured the emperor, but was surrounded by tens of thousands of furious enemy warriors, millions of hostile civilians, and an entire continent about which he knew practically nothing. He had at his disposal only a few hundred Spaniards and closest Spanish reinforcements were in Cuba, more than 1500 kilometers away. Courts kept Montezuma captive in the place, making it look as if he remained free and in charge, as if Spanish ambassador were no more than a guest. The Aztec Empire was an extremely centralized polity. An unprecedented situation paralyzed it. Montezuma continued to behave as if he ruled the empire, and the Aztec elite continued to obey him, which means they obeyed courts. This situation lasted for several months. During this time, courts interrogated Montezuma and his attendants, trained translators in a variety of local languages, and sent small Spanish expeditions in all directions to become familiar with the Aztec Empire and various tribes, peoples, and cities it ruled. The Aztec elite eventually revolted against courts, and Montezuma elected a new emperor and drove the Spaniards from Tenochtitlan. However, by now numerous cracks had appeared in the imperial edifice. Edifice. Okay, edifice. A large building. Courts used the knowledge he had gained to price the cracks open wider and split the empire from within. He convinced many of the empire's subject people to join him against the ruling Aztec elite. The subject people miscalculated badly. They hated the Aztecs, but he knew nothing of Spain or the Caribbean genocide. They assumed that with Spaniard help they could shake off the Aztec yoke. The idea that the Spanish would take over never occurred to them. They were sure that if Cords and his few hundred henchmen caused any trouble, they could easily be overwhelmed. The rebellious peoples promised Cords with an army of 10,000 of local troops and with the help of Byzantine, Terminated and conquered the city. Okay, conquered the city. At this stage, more and more Spanish soldiers and settlers, more and more Spanish soldiers and settlers began arriving in Mexico. Some from Cuba, the all were from Spain, and the local people realized that what was happening was too late. Within a century of landing at the Veracruz, the native population of America shrunk over by 90% and many to unfamiliar diseases that reached America within meters. The survivors found themselves under the thumb of the greedy and racist and it was far worse than that of Aztecs. 10 years after Cortes landed in Mexico, Pizarro, right, on the shore of the Inca Empire. He had far fewer soldiers than Cortes. His expedition numbered just 168 men. Yet Pizarro benefited from all the knowledge and experience in the previous invasions. The Inca, in contrast, knew nothing about the fate of the Aztecs. Pizarro plagiarized Scots. He declared himself a peaceful Missouri from the king of Spain and invited the Inca ruler at Quilapa to a diplomatic interview and then kidnapped him. Pizarro proceeded to conquer the paralyzed empire with the help of local allies. But the subject people of the Inca Empire known the fate of the inhabitant of Mexico and thrown, they would not have thrown in their lot with the invaders, but they did not know. Right. The native peoples of America were not the only one to pay a heavy price for the parochial outlook. Parochial outlook. Parochial. Parochial outlook, right? Parish, a local church districts. Limited in outlook. Okay, I got it. Uh, the great empires of Asia, the Ottoman, the Safavid, the Mughal, and the Chinese, quickly heard that Europeans had discovered something big. Yet they displayed little interest in their discoveries. They continued to believe that the world revolved around Asia and make no attempt to compete with the Europeans for control of America or the new ocean lands in the Atlantic and the Pacific. Even pan-European kingdoms such as Scotland and Denmark sent a few explorer and conquer expeditions to America, but not one expedition of either exploration and conquest was ever sent to America from the Islamic world, India or China. The first non-European power that tried to send a military expedition to America was Japan. That happened in June 1942, when a Japanese expedition conquered Kiska and two small islands off the Alaskan coast, capturing in the process 10 US soldiers and a dog. Japanese never got any closer to the mainland. It is hard to argue that Ottomans or Chinese were too far away or that they lacked the technological, economic, or military vehicle. The resources that sent Zenhai from China to East probably should have been enough to reach America. The Chinese just weren't interested. The first Chinese world map to show America was not issued until 1609 by European missionary. For 300 years, Europeans enjoyed undisputed mastery in America and Oceania, in the Atlantic and the Pacific. The only significant struggles in those regions were between the European powers, between different European powers. The wealth and resources accumulated by the European eventually enabled them to invade Asia to defeat its empire and divide it among themselves. When the Ottomans, Persian Indians, and Chinese woke up and began paying attention, it was too late. Only in 20th century did non-European culture adopt a truly global vision. This was one of the crucial factors that led to the collapse of European hegemony. Hegemony, their power, or their dominance. Thus, in the Algerian War of the Independence, 1954-62, Algerian guerrillas defeated a French army with an overwhelming numerical, technological, and economic advantage. The Algerians prevailed because they were supported by a global anti-colonial network and because they worked out how to harness the world's media to cause as well as public opinion in France itself. The defeat that Little North Vietnam inflicted on American colossus was based on a similar strategy. These guerrilla forces showed that even superpowers could be defeated if a local struggle became a global cause. It is interesting to contemplate what might have happened that Montezuma being able to manipulate public opinion in Spain and gain assistance from one of the Spain's rival, Portugal, France, or the Ottoman Empire. Okay. Rare spiders and forgotten scripts. Modern science and modern empires were motivated by the restless feeling that perhaps something important awaited beyond the horizon, something they had better explore and master. Yet, the connection between science and empire went much deeper. Not just the motivation, but also the practice of empire. Setting up a scientific discipline was an imperial project. When the Muslims conquered India, they did not bring along archaeologists to systematically study Indian history, anthropologists to study Indian culture, geologists to study Indian soil, or zoologists to study Indian fauna. When the British conquered India, they did all of these things. On 10 April 1802, the Great Survey of India was launched. It lasted 60 years. With the help of tens of thousands of native laborers, scholars, and guides, the British carefully mapped the whole of India, marking borders, measuring distances, and even calculating for the first time the exact height of the Mount Everest and the other Himalayan peaks. The British explored the military resources of Indian provinces and the location of their gold mines. But they also took the trouble to collect information about rare Indian spiders, to catalog colorful butterflies, to trace the ancient origin of the extinct Indian languages, and to dig up forgotten ruins. Mohenjo-daro was one of the chief cities of Indus Valley civilization, which finished in the 3rd millennium of BC and was destroyed around 1900 BC. None of India's pre-British rulers, neither the Mauryas nor the Guptas nor the Delhi Sultans nor the great Mughals, had given okay, had given the ruins a second glance. But a British archaeological survey took notice of the site in 1922. A British team has then excavated it and discovered the first great civilization of India, which no Indian had been aware of. Another telling example of British scientific curiosity was deciphering the cuneiform script. This was the main script used throughout the Middle East for close to 3000 years, but the last person able to read it probably died sometime in the early 4th millennium AD. Since then, inhabitants of the region infrequently encountered cuneiform inscription on monuments, still as ancient ruins and broken pots. But they had no idea how to read the weird angular scratches, and as far as we know, they never tried. Cuneiform came to Cuneiform came to the attention of Europeans in 1618 when the Spanish ambassador in Persia went sightseeing in the ruin of ancient Persepolis, where he saw inscriptions that nobody could explain to him. News of the unknown script spread among European savants and fueled their curiosity. In 1657, European scholars published the first transcription of cuneiform text from Persepolis. More and more transcription followed, and for close to 2 centuries, scholars in West tried to decipher them. None succeeded. In 1830s, a British officer named Henry Rawlinson was sent to Persia to help the Shah train his army. In the European style. In his spare time, Rawlinson traveled around Persia, and one day he was led by local guides to a cliff in the Zagros Mountains and shown the huge Bahistun inscription, about 15-meter high and 20-meter wide. 25-meter wide. It had been etched high up on the cliff face on the command of the king Darius I, sometime around 500 BC. It was written in cuneiform script in three languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and the Babylonian. The inscription was well known to the local population, but nobody could read it. Rawlinson became convinced that if he could decipher the writing, he would enable him another scholar to read the numerous inscriptions and texts that were at the time being discovered all over the Middle East, opening a door into ancient and forgotten world. The first step in deciphering the lettering was to produce an accurate transcription that could be sent back to Europe. Rawlinson decided that to do so, scaling the steep cliff to copy the strange letters. He hired several locals to help him, most notably a Kurdish boy who climbed the most inaccessible parts of the cliff in order to copy the upper portion of the description. In 1847, the project was completed and a full and accurate copy was sent to Europe. Rawlinson did not rest on his laurels. As an army officer, he had military and political missions to carry out. But whenever he had a spare moment, he puzzled over the secret script. He tried one method after another and finally managed to decipher the Old Persian part of the inscription. This was easiest since Old Persian was not that different from modern Persian, which Rawlinson knew well. Understanding of the Old Persian section gave him the key he needed to unlock the secrets of the Elamite and Babylonian sections. The great doors swung open, and out came a rush of ancient but lively voices. The bustle of Sumerian bazaars, the proclamation of Assyrian kings, the arguments of Babylonian bureaucrats, and without the efforts of modern European imperialists such as Rawlinson, we would not have known much about the fate of ancient Middle Eastern empires. Another notable imperialist scholar was William Jones. Jones arrived in India in September 1783 to serve as a judge in the Supreme Court of Bengal. He was so captivated by the wonders of India that within less than 6 months of his arrival, he had founded the Asiatic Society. This academic organization was devoted to studying the cultures, histories, and societies of Asia, and in particular those of India. Within 2 years, John published his observation on the Sanskrit language, which pioneered the science of comparative linguistics. In his publication, Jones pointed out surprising similarities between Sanskrit and the ancient Hindi language that became the sacred tongue of Hindu ritual, and the Greek and the Latin languages, as well as similarities between all these languages and Gothic, Celtic, or Persian, German, French, and English. Doesn't in Sanskrit, mother is Matra, and little it is matter, and in all Celtic it is Mater. Jones surmised that, guess that. Oh, surmise means guess. All these languages must share a common origin, developing from a now forgotten ancient ancestry. He was thus the first to identify what later came to be called the Indo-European family of languages. John's study was an important milestone, not merely due to his bold hypothesis but also because of the orderly methodology that he developed to compare languages. It was adopted by other scholars, enabling them systematically to study the development of all the world's language. Linguistics received enthusiastic empirical support. The European Empire believed that in order to govern effectively, they must know the languages and cultures of their subjects. British officials arriving in India were supposed to spend the 3 years in Calcutta College, where they studied Hindu and Muslim law alongside English law, Sanskrit, Urdu and Persian alongside Greek and Latin, and Tamil, Bengali and Hindustani culture alongside mathematics, economics, and geography. The study of linguistics provided invaluable help in understanding the structure and the grammar of local languages. Thanks to the work of people like William Jones and Henry Rawlinson, the European conquerors knew their empire very well, far better indeed than any previous conqueror or even than the native population itself. The superior knowledge had obvious practical advantage. Without such knowledge, it is unlikely that a ridiculously small number of Britons could have succeeded in governing, oppressing, and exploiting so many hundreds of millions of Indians for 2 centuries. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, fewer than 5,000 British officials, about 20,000 to 70,000 British soldiers, and perhaps another 1 lakh British business people hangers on, wives and children were sufficient to conquer and rule up to 300 million Indians. Yet these practical advantages were not the only reason why empires financed the study of linguistics, botany, geography, and history. No less important was the fact that science gave the empire an ideological justification. Modern Europeans come to believe that acquiring new knowledge was always good. The fact that the empire produced a constant stream of new knowledge branded them as progressive and positive enterprises. Even today, histories of sciences such as geography, archaeology, and cannot avoid crediting the European empires, at least indirectly. Histories of botany have little to say about the suffering of the Aboriginal Australians, but they usually found some kind words for James Cook and Joseph Banks. Furthermore, the new knowledge accumulated by the empires impossible, made it possible, at least in theory, to benefit the conquered population and bring them the benefits of progress, to provide them with medicine and education, to build railroads and canals to ensure justice and prosperity. Imperialists claimed that their empires were not vast enterprises of exploitation but rather altruistic projects. Altruistically, altruistically is okay, altruistic. Altruistic means selflessly, selfless projects conducted for the sake of non-European races. In Rudyard Kipling's word, the white man's burden. Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best he breed, go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness, on fluttered folk and wild, your new cod, sullen people, half devil and half child. Of course, the fact often belied this myth. The British conquered Bengal, the richest province of India, in 1764. The new rulers were interested in little except enriching themselves. They adopted a disastrous economic policy that a few years later led to the outbreak of Great Bengal famine. Disastrous. It began in 1769, reached catastrophic levels in 1770, and lasted until 1773. About 10 million Bengalis, a third of the province's population, died in the calamity. In truth, neither the narratives of oppression and exploitation nor that of the white man burden completely match the facts. The European empires did so many different things on such a large scale that you can find plenty of examples to support whatever you want to say about them. To think that these empires were evil monstrosities that spread that oppression and injustice around the world. You could easily fill an encyclopedia with their crimes. Encyclopedia with their crimes. You want to argue that, in fact, improve the conditions of the subjects with new medicines, better economic conditions, and greater security. You could fill another encyclopedia with their achievements. Due to their close cooperation with science, these empires wielded so much power and changed the world to such an extent that perhaps they cannot be simply labeled as good or evil. They created the world as we know it, including the ideologies we use in order to judge them. But science was also used by imperialists to more sinister ends. Okay, biologists, anthropologists, and even linguists provide scientific proof that Europeans are superior to all other races and consequently have right to rule over them. After William Jones argued that all Indo-European languages descend from a single ancient language, many scholars were eager to discover who the speaker of the language had been. They noticed that the earliest Sanskrit speaker who had invaded India from Central Asia more than 3000 years ago had called themselves Arya. The speaker of the earliest Persian language called themselves Arya. European scholars consequently surmised that people who spoke the primordial language that gave birth to both Sanskrit and Persian must have called themselves Aryans. Could it be coincident that those who founded the magnificent Indian, Persian, Greek, and Roman civilization were all Aryans? Next, British, French, and German scholars wedded the linguistic theory about the industrious Aryans to Darwin's theory of natural selection and posted that Aryans were not just a linguistic group but a biological entity, a race. And not just any race but a master race of tall, light haired, blue eyed, hard working, and super rational humans who emerged from the mist of North to lay the foundation of culture throughout the world. Regrettably, the Aryans who invaded India and Persia intermarried with the local natives they founded in these lands, losing their light complexion and blonde hair, and with them their rationality and intelligence. The civilizations of India and Persia consequently declined. In Europe, on the other hand, the Aryans preserved their racial purity. This is why Europeans had managed to conquer the world and why they were fit to rule it, provided they took precautions not to mix with inferior races. I think this is just a theory. Just such racist theories enjoyed prominence and respectability for many generations, justifying the Western conquest for the world. Eventually, in the late 20th century, just as Western Empire crumbled, racism became anathema among scientists and politicians alike. But the belief in Western superiority did not vanish. Instead, it took on new forms. Racism was replaced by culturalism. Today's elite usually justify superiority in terms of historical differences between cultures rather than biological differences between races. We no longer say it's in the blood, we say it's in the culture. Okay. This European right wing parties which oppose Muslim immigrants usually dictate to avoid racial terminology. Marine Le Pen's speechwriters would have been shown the doubt in the spot that they had, suggested that the leader of French National, go on television to declare that we don't want those inferior Semites to dilute our Aryan blood and spoil our Aryan civilization. Instead, the French Front National, the Dutch Party of Freedom, for the future of Austria, and their like tend argue that Western cultures as it evolved in Europe is characterized by democratic values, tolerance, and gender equality, whereas Muslim culture, which evolved in the Middle East, is characterized by hierarchical politics, fantasism, and misogyny, misogyny. hatred content. Since the two cultures are so different, and since many Muslim immigrants were unwilling to adopt Western rules, they should not be allowed to enter, lest they foment. Since the two cultures are so different, and since many Muslim immigrants were unwilling to adopt Western values, they should not be allowed to enter, lest they foment internal conflicts and co-opted European democracy and liberalism. Foment. To provoke conflict. Such culturist arguments are fed by scientific studies in the humanities and social sciences that highlight the so-called clash of civilization and the fundamental differences between different cultures. Not all historians and anthropologists accept these theories or support their political uses, but whereas biologists today have an easy time disavowing racism, simply explaining that biological difference between present-day human population is trivial. It is harder for historians and anthropologists to disavow racism. After all, it's the difference between human culture are trivial, and why should we pay historians and anthropologists to study them? Scientists have provided the Imperial Project with practical knowledge, ideological justification, and technological gadgets. Without this contribution, it is highly questionable whether Europeans could have conquered the world. The conquerors returned the favor by providing scientists with information and protection, supporting all kinds of strange and fascinating projects, and spreading the scientific way of thinking to the far corners of the earth. Without imperial support, it is doubtful whether modern science would have progressed very far. There are very few scientific disciplines that did not begin their lives as servant to imperial growth and do not owe a large portion of their discoveries, collection, buildings, and scholarship to the generous help of army officers, navy captains, and imperial governors. This is obviously not all the whole story. Science was supported by other institutions, not just by empires. And European empires rose and flourished thanks also to factors other than science. Behind the military rise of both science and empire allows for a particularly important force, capitalism. Were it not for businessmen seeking to make money, Columbus would not have reached America, James Cook would not have reached Australia, and Neil Armstrong would not have taken a small step on the surface of the moon. So yeah, we have completed the chapter 15, and the next will be chapter 16, the capitalist creed. So now I'm gonna end this live stream. So please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, My Fluency Journey, where I will record some videos. And before stopping the stream, let's revise all the let's all the words learned today. Okay, so yeah, we will revise. Obliged, bound by duty or expressing gratitude. Ambitious, strongly motivated. Usurpation, taking power or position unlawfully. Environment, surrounding area. Insatiable, never fully satisfied. Peculiar, strange. Smoldering, smoke, with the word subjugated, dominate. Unscrupulous, lacking ethics or moral principles. Dishonest, unscrupulous. Plunging, falling quickly and rapidly. Exhilarating, exciting and thrilling. Edifice, a large building or a complex system. Parochial, narrow-minded or limited in scope. Parochial persons is narrow-minded person. Hegemony, dominant leaderships or dominance. Misogyny, hatred or prejudice against women. Sexism, chauvinism, discrimination. Foment, to incite or stir up or trouble, rebellion or unrest. Instigate, agitate or provocation. Okay, got it? So yeah, so keep reading, keep growing.